Episode 8, Is Christianity Compatible with Anarchism?
The Anarcho-Christian Podcast, evaluating the relationship between the Christian and the state.
I'm rising up with a full heart. I'm taking my strength from inside. I'm rising up with a new mind. I'm taking your words to the new behind. I'm coming up from underneath the red, from underneath the veil.
Hi everyone, welcome back. Today I will be discussing the compatibility of Christianity and anarchism. I hope to thoroughly lay out how they are compatible, as well as address a couple of major objections. But before we begin, and if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button on whatever podcast you're using, so not to miss any future episodes. And if you're not sure where to find us, visit anarchochristian.com/subscribe. There you'll find links to subscribe to the podcast on iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, Android, and YouTube. And speaking of iTunes, we had 3 new 5-star ratings and reviews since the last recording. James and Jewel wrote, "Just what I was looking for. I have been listening to libertarian podcasts for about 6 years, but I've been unable to find a podcast that looks at politics through the lens of my Christianity. Until now. I've subscribed since episode 1, and I couldn't be happier. Great job, Stephen Rose and Pax Libertas Productions. No king but Christ." Thank you, James and Jewel, and thank you for subscribing since the beginning. Josh Grantham wrote, "Christ is my king. You can't love your neighbor as yourself if you want to threaten him with violence to rule over him. It's so nice to hear this logical conclusion of our faith presented with clarity. Thank you." And thank you, Josh. And I hope that this episode goes over some of those things as well, presenting some of the logical conclusions and, of course, with clarity. Gary Bryans wrote, "Should be in every Christian's podcast feed. This podcast has been great in helping me to both align my Christian and libertarian beliefs together and to equip me to combat the wayward Christian brethren who have been blinded by the lies of the state. Keep up the great work, Stephen, and I look forward to more great content in the coming weeks, months, and years. No king but Christ." Thank you, Gary. And I'm glad that I can be a resource. I really am. And I appreciate you, and I appreciate everyone's reviews and ratings for the podcast. If anyone else is enjoying the podcast, let me and other users know by leaving a 5-star rating and review on iTunes or wherever you catch the episodes. It'll help us reach more listeners and grow the show. Since the last show, we also had our 5th patron through Patreon. Thank you so much, Patrick. I appreciate your pledge and your support. If anyone else is interested in supporting us with a one-time or monthly donation through Patreon, visit the support tab on anarchochristian.com. That'll take you to our Patreon page where you'll find a few ways to support us. So if you like what we're doing, hit the link, check out the options for support. And again, thank you, Patrick, for your financial support. Now, on with today's show. It is an understandable question. Is Christianity compatible with anarchism? People are just as inquisitive on the theistic and the non-theistic side. And they are as condemning on both sides. If you've ever been in the position to answer this question, regardless if the question is sincere or hostile, it usually takes quite a bit of unpacking. And there may be times you just don't know the right answer. Regardless of your position, I hope this episode will be helpful for at least 2 reasons. To give you the answers to the questions you might be struggling with, and 2, to be a resource to direct people to, regardless if it's a person of faith or someone who has a problem with it. And if you've been directed to this message from someone else, welcome. I hope to answer all of your questions in under half an hour or so. So to start, I think it is important to define anarchism. As I mentioned in a prior episode on J.R.R. Tolkien, there are differing opinions and definitions, and it really is important we establish and agree upon a definition. On episode 5, I addressed Tolkien's statement where he clarified that when he spoke of anarchism, he specified, quote, philosophically understood meaning the abolition of control, not whiskered men with bombs, end quote. This really is the common issue with the word even today, and it's both sides of an argument that get it wrong. In so many cases, we see a left-right paradigm. We see what is culturally referred to on the, quote, right as abhorring anarchism by referencing the chaotic imagery that Tolkien speaks of. And then we have people that identify on the, quote, left part of the spectrum that glorify it to a degree for the exact same reason. It really isn't an unusual spot for someone to be in concerning a topic about the abolition of control. It's the same problem terms like liberty and progress have. Liberty, for, again, people on the right, has become a mantra with barely an understanding of its true nature. It's become primarily a euphemism of conservative values, which then is an unspoken support of police action to be used on anyone that holds contrary values. Progress, for the left, has likewise become a mantra that has lost all of its actual meaning. Progress is meant in a universal sense, society moving forward, mankind moving forward, but the only thing they are concerned with is their values moving forward or progressing. And they support an any means necessary approach to silencing those that disagree in many times. As well, progressives in the last few years have made a unique, ironic situation of using college campuses to call for segregation. With any sense of history, I'm sure you can see the irony of this. College campuses were the birthplace of our modern free speech and desegregation process. Now, groups of people claiming the same cultural heritage of fighting the power for race and speech progress are now silencing voices and demanding areas where races be kept separate. So, obviously, anarchism finds itself in the same spot. Liberty doesn't mean conservative values. It's anyone being free from oppression of others. And, if I might add, even if those others sincerely believe that the person with liberty isn't making the best personal choices. As well, progress doesn't mean reversing. It doesn't mean that marginalized groups get to now hold the power over others that they feel were the same people that oppressed them at another time. Anarchism doesn't mean violence. So, what does it mean? Anarchy is made up of two ancient Greek terms, a meaning not or without, and archy means ruler or leader or authority. Without any bias, anarchy simply means no ruler. The ruler, leader, and authority it is referencing is exactly what the term anarchy is applied to today, the government, or also known as the state. I will turn to Murray Rothbard for a definition of the state. In his phenomenal short book, The Anatomy of the State, Rothbard wrote, quote, briefly, the state is that organization in society which attempts to maintain a monopoly of the use of force and violence in a given territorial area. End quote. On a side note, if you have not read this book, I strongly recommend you do. I'll have an Amazon link in the show notes if you'd like to pick it up. Like I said, it's short and if there's any hesitant feelings that you have toward anarchism or sympathies for the state, this book just destroys it. So if you're not wanting to unapologetically refer to yourself as an anarchist, don't read it. If you want to take the challenge, I'll have the link in the show notes. Okay, getting back on track. The state has a monopoly on violence. It holds the monopoly. This is why anarchism and violence are mutually exclusive. If you claim anarchism and use violence to subdue and control an entity, regardless if this entity used to have the monopoly on force, you are the state now. I'm not sure if I can put it any more clearly. Anarchism is necessarily non-violent. So, what is violence? The violence of the state that Rothbard and other consistent anarchists refer to is also known as the initiation of force. The initiation of force is a more scholarly way of saying he started it. Who punched first? Who hurt or stole from someone without their consent? At least two individuals were not using violence against each other, and one decides to grab, punch, steal, or whatever you can imagine. This is the initiation. What the initiation of force does not refer to is the movement of a person to then defend themselves or retaliate. I hope this clearly brings us full circle. If you use violence, you are the state. If you are the state, you cannot be anti-state. You cannot claim no ruler if you are the ruler. So, the initiation of force and violence should be clearly understood as being anti-Christian. However, I fully understand the paradox we run into. Universally, people understand that Christianity is supposed to stand for peace and nonviolence. This is why any people have an issue with Christianity. They claim all of the nonviolent speech, yet they are the first to support using violence whenever it seems beneficial. This brings me back to the liberty ironies I mentioned. Now, I am speaking more from a USA American position rather than some of the other countries that have strong statist Christian entities like Russia and South America. Those come to mind immediately, and I've never experienced it myself, but I've talked with people online, and they've given me an idea of kind of the socialist side of the Christian anarchy. So the United States likes to point to their conservative Christian or religious right values, but many times there isn't much of a difference besides just the surface level and superficial rhetoric. In the U.S., Christians like to pretend they're anti-socialism while supporting many socialistic programs from the United States government. In both the military and domestic police violence, it's thought to be necessary and encouraged by American Christians. This is the monopoly on violence. If an individual that is not a representative of the government cannot do something that the government claims it can, this is the monopoly. If the government can do something that is illegal for the rest of the citizens, it's immoral. What we've created with this monopoly is a group of people with the power to steal and to hurt other people without consequence. One of my favorite writers that pointed this inconsistency out numerous times is Lysander Spooner. In just one of the instances, he phrased it as, quote, "Man's natural rights are his own against the whole world, and any infringement of them is equally a crime, whether committed by one man or by millions, whether committed by one man calling himself a robber or by any other name indicating his true character, or by millions calling themselves a government, end quote. So this is anarchism and the state. We've gone over what the state is and what violence is within this context. With this foundation, it should be very easy to identify how Christianity is not just compatible with anarchism, but incompatible with the state. But let's run through a couple of key points. For this, I like to ask Christians and non-Christians to remove preconceived notions and limitations that we feel the Bible places on certain actions. We all have them. You're likely not hearing this for the first time, never having heard someone else define Christianity or come to your own conclusions for better or worse. A few points that we can agree on. Again, Christian or not, Christianity holds a central tenet of do not steal and do not kill. This comes from the Ten Commandments from the Old Testament, usually stylized in the King James language of thou shalt not. A third point to keep in mind may seem a little more vague, but it is Christ's teaching to love your neighbor. Now, neighbor can be sometimes misunderstood as being a modern reference to someone that lives a certain distance from you. That's how we use it today, but the biblical terminology pretty much refers to everyone, regardless of proximity, age, race, etc., etc. Two distinctions within that will be brother and enemy. Brother being a fellow believer in the faith, and enemy, obviously, someone opposed to you and most likely set to use violence against you. So, to sum up, Christianity explicitly teaches do not steal, do not kill, and to love your neighbor. Anarchism, properly defined as non-violence, would hold to the libertarian principle referred to as the NAP, or the NAP, and it stands for the non-aggression principle. There are many people from theists like John Locke to anti-theists like Ayn Rand that have essentially stated the non-aggression principle in their writings. But I like to look to Murray Rothbard again for a concise definition. This is from his 1963 essay, War, Peace, and the State. Quote, "No one may threaten or commit violence, aggress, against another man's person or property. Violence may be employed only against the man who commits such violence, that is, only defensively against the aggressive violence of another. In short, no violence may be employed against a non-aggressor. Here is the fundamental rule from which can be deduced the entire corpus of libertarian theory." And Matt Kibbe, he wrote probably the most distilled down version in modern language that I think that we have. And I think that he's the one who came up with it. It's the title of one of his books, Don't Hurt People and Don't Take Their Stuff. So the NAP, and therefore anarchism, properly defined, essentially means don't hurt people and don't take their stuff. This is basically two of the three Christian tenets we already mentioned. Two of the 10 commandments, don't kill and don't steal. And there were some comments in there as well from Rothbard concerning defense, and I know that there's a lot of differing opinions within Christian anarchism on defense and pacifism and absolute pacifism and all of that. And we'll get into that stuff later. But just concerning what the NAP lines out as far as not initiating the force against a non-aggressor. That's what I really want to focus on, and obviously that does line up with, two of the 3 tenets we mentioned, and therefore two of the 10 commandments. So, loving your neighbor is a more positive command rather than just a do not. I already mentioned what neighbor was not. It's not someone, just living within a certain proximity from you. And they're not a particular race or a certain nationality. But it also helps to picture who they are. So, who is your neighbor? It definitely can be someone that lives near you, but it's also your spouse, and it's your children. It's the stranger at the supermarket. Someone you've never met 3 states over is your neighbor. Someone in a different country is your neighbor. This is why racism and nationalism are completely incompatible with Christianity. There is zero distinction for who we are to love and pray for. We are to love and pray for a brother, a friend, and even an enemy. So, is Christianity compatible with anarchism? Does anarchism allow the initiation of violence against others? No. And neither does Christianity. Does government necessitate the initiation of violence? Yes. Okay. I know I won't get off that easy. I know I asked you to set aside any preconceived notions, and by this point, all manner of objections have likely sprung up. So I will try to anticipate those, and if I don't address any, leave a note wherever you keep up with Anarcho-Christian, whether it's the Facebook page, Twitter, YouTube, or the website, or even just send me a private message on any of those platforms. But we have a great closed Facebook group, and I need to plug it here as well. If you're not part of it yet, I strongly recommend it for discussions like this. There is a wide variety of denominations and political affiliations, and even non-theist that are part of the group, and everybody contributes, and there's always great lively discussions, and everyone's very welcoming, and I appreciate you guys for doing that. But the Facebook group is a great place to discuss objections like the ones I'm about to go over. So, all right. So a common Christian objection to anarchism is, of course, Romans 13. I know we kind of poke fun at that sometimes in what's referred to as the statist interpretation on Romans 13. I do plan on an extended episode one of these days dealing with Romans 13 and its proper context and the shameful handling of it today. But first, I'd like to see what the objector thinks Romans 13 means. And from my experience, Romans 13 is unquestioned support for the government. Of course, that comes from the likes of big evangelical names like Paula White and Franklin Graham and pretty much anybody that you see on TV. From them, we hear language that gets scary close to deifying the Republican president and excusing anything they do, even if it violates the Constitution as they claim to hold to religiously, or even the principles of using violence that we went over that's incompatible with the faith. So Romans 13 does not say everything the government does is ordained in such a way as to make it something we should be supportive of. As well, with this interpretation, it not only needs to be applied to our chosen president, but also, heaven forbid, applied to a Democratic president. We also need to apply it to all governments, if that's the case. From the time the book of Romans was penned under the imperial Rome's deadly occupation, through the other bloody empires of history, to recent buzzword names like Stalin and Hitler. We need to apply it consistently then. And I don't have time to dig into a proper in-context reading of Romans 13 on today's show, but I wanted to go over the root of this objection. Okay, a common atheist objection is that theism is completely incompatible with anarchism. I think it's best summed up in the anarchist phrase, no gods, no masters. I understand the sentiment, but this is misapplying anarchism beyond what it really means. We went over the etymology of anarchy, and it doesn't make any reference to theism. We have a separate term for that, and it is atheism. Anarchism is exclusively referencing the relationship between men, something that we can call the horizontal relationship. As our beliefs in the NAP or natural rights suggest, we truly are all created equal. God, regardless if you believe in him or not, is necessarily in a different relationship. I hope we can at least agree on that. God of the Christian Bible is defined as a self-existing being outside of space and time that created everything. You, me, animals, plants, the entire universe. Created everything out of nothing. This is the vertical relationship. Again, regardless if you believe in the deity of God, it is important to agree on the Christian's definition of God to see if Christianity is compatible or not. Its compatibility does not rest on someone else's rejection of theism. The compatibility of Christianity rests solely on Christianity. I'm fond of the accepting nature of the term anarchism without adjectives, even though I've heard it used in a derogatory manner from someone saying anarcho-capitalist, anarcho-communist, anarcho-Christian, or all unnecessary terms. But I've also heard it used along the lines of saying that as long as we agree on the non-initiation of force, I don't care what you are. I appreciate this, even though I do hope that I did well laying out that Christianity is actually compatible with anarchism. And I would personally question certain faiths' compatibility based on that faith's tenets. But practically, as long as we can agree on the non-initiation of force, I don't really care to argue the point of adjectives. So, I hope you liked this episode. I hope I did well laying out the compatibility of anarchism, addressing a couple of the major objections. And again, like I said, we'll have a longer, more thorough episode one of these days on Romans 13. But if you like the episode, like and share on Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, or iTunes. And think about supporting us on Patreon. And again, I'll have the Amazon affiliate link up for some of the books that I mentioned this evening. So if you don't have them already and you want to pick them up, if you go through our affiliate link, it will give us a small commission to help us keep things going around here, and it will not be an additional charge for you. So until next time, grace and peace. No king but Christ.
From underneath the face to bring a new day, to bring a new day dawn.
Thank you for listening to the Anarcho-Christian Podcast. Subscribe to our email notifications at anarchochristian.com. Like us on facebook.com/anarchochristian and follow us on Twitter at anarchoxp. Subscribe to our podcast and YouTube to join us next time as we continue to evaluate the relationship between the Christian and the state. No king but Christ.
This has been a Pax Libertas Productions podcast.